I think it's a revelation where if it's true that I designed a system perfectly to get me exactly where I am, then it should also be true that I can design another system to get me exactly where I want to go.
Welcome to Ultrahabits. Here, we go under the hood with our guests to unpack the minutiae and to understand what processes and systems they engage or research that result in ultra-enhanced living.
Howdy, folks. It is RJ Singh. Welcome to another week on Ultrahabits, and we are talking to Mike Malatesta today. It is all things entrepreneurship. How do we start, build, scale, and exit a business and do it without losing our shit, going crazy, and keeping it all together? The conversation I have with Mike acknowledges that what ultimately helped us start and commence a growth journey is not necessarily the same skills required to scale and ultimately exit. And he is on a mission to help entrepreneurs do this piece effectively. Now, Mike is a proven entrepreneur himself. He's sold a couple businesses. He has grown firms from the bottom up, literally scrounging for cash, getting investment from family and whoever was willing to invest in his big ideas and ultimately take a chance on him. And he had built initially what was a massive waste management firm, and he ultimately sold that business. And what he realized during that journey was that there was a lot of things that he could have learned and done better, quicker, smarter, and faster had he had the right trusted advisors with him advising him on how to get out of his own way. And that's what we're here to unpack today. The entrepreneurial journey is something that everyone in this day and age seems to admire. It's a journey that everyone wants to embark on. The entrepreneur, let's face it, seems to be the new athlete and rock star. But what many people like Mike know, and what a lot of people that are not yet engaged in the journey don't know yet, is that the skills and the passion that are required to continue to grow towards that trajectory of massive exponential outcomes, the skills require change, the mindset require changes, and the way we go about things need to change. And so we're here to talk to Mike about all this stuff. Mike currently has a podcast called How Did It Happen? I met Mike through some mutual friends within the LinkedIn ecosystem, connected with him, had a chat, real humble guy, straight shooter, and was a joy to talk to. For entrepreneurs out there, or for anyone that is shaping an idea, ready to go to market, this is a conversation you're going to want to listen to. Mike is creating a world, an ecosystem of entrepreneurs that are all on a similar path, and he's helping advise these entrepreneurs on how they could avoid tripping up in the same kind of mistakes that he made himself. We're getting close to Christmas, folks. I am doing a bit of filming from home. The show must go on, and we continue to release these episodes weekly. Hopefully, whilst you guys have some time off, you can get to some of the episodes you haven't yet checked out. Again, please go to www.ultrahabits.co. If you haven't, subscribe, sign up, get onto the cool shit that we're doing. If you already have, thank you for your continued support. Anyhow, I'm going to go. I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Mike. Peace out, guys. Have a fantastic Christmas and a safe New Year. Mike, welcome to the Ultra Habits show. I always love when I have a fellow podcaster on the show because it kind of makes the whole process familiar to everyone. But welcome.
Yeah, thanks, RJ. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah. Look, I'm really glad Craig introduced us. He's been really wonderful in terms of his recommendations. He's a real mover and shaker and connector, isn't he?
He is, and he's been wonderful, for me during my book writing process, and I was just blown away by the book he wrote, Blank Canvas, and I thought I just needed to connect with him. So I connected with him out of the blue, and it's been a really, great mutual connection since. He's a good guy, very good guy.
Yeah. So we're gonna jump into your book, your show. How did it happen, ownership, and kind of your movement to help entrepreneurs and business owners get unstuck.
Yeah.
But before we get there and go there, I know you're from Wisconsin. Why don't you give our audience a bit of flavor as to how you came up, where you're from, what your background is about?
Sure. Yeah. I was born outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and lived there pretty much in the same 1 mile area for till I got out of college. And then out of college, I got a job as a management trainee, and that was a really great position because I got to I was working for a waste management company, and I was moving around to different locations and doing different things, and it was really exciting for me. And I did that for 5 years, and I thought, well, maybe one day I could be this, the CEO of this big company. And instead of that materializing, I got fired from that job instead. And so that was my first stock. Didn't know what to do with my life. I was 26 when that happened. And fortunately, though, through a series of things I had never seen coming, I used that experience to start my first company 6 months later or so, and that began my entrepreneurial path. And so I had been in Wisconsin when I got fired, so I just ended up staying here in the pretty much in the center of the U.S. and made a go of it.
It's interesting, the waste management business. I've got some friends here in Australia that work in Cleanaway. I've been involved in Cleanaway for a long time, and I'm in logistics. It's an industry, logistics, and I'm sure waste management is the same, that we've come to appreciate over COVID, because you can have all these wonderful services and products, but there's certain things that are required, like all
Right.
the time, right? Like and they're always growing, they're always required. They may not be sexy. In regards to the industry, though, waste management in particular, what's your view on the industry? Like, is it pretty fragmented? Is there a lot of smaller operators? Is it consolidated? Is there high barriers to entry? What was your experience within that industry?
Sure. Well, I only have familiarity in the U.S., but I'll give it a go. What I think is great about the waste management industry is that there's so many niches. There are so many different types of problems that are out there that need to be solved and require different skill sets, different facilities, different equipment. That it's I've been doing this my 30 some years, and there's still things that I'm learning about waste that I never knew. So when the trash business, what I call garbage or trash or refuse or whatever you might call it, that's the most mature waste business in the U.S., I'd say. And that's where I grew up, in that business. I started driving a truck when I was in college, and that's how I got interested in the business in the first place. But when I got fired and we were looking for an opportunity, I didn't think that I could really compete and differentiate in that part of the business. And so instead, we focused on wastewater at first, and particularly wastewater from manufacturing operations that was contaminated during the manufacturing process and needed to be taken to a treatment facility before it could be discharged back into the sewer system. And so we thought that was a less mature, certainly less consolidated, a lot of small operators, a lot of mom and pops. And we thought, well, maybe we could actually make a difference here. And so we went into that niche, and I've stayed there my whole career. And that now is catching up. There's consolidation there's a lot of private equity funding available to roll-ups and stuff in that industry. So it's maybe 20 years behind the trash business, but it's starting to get there. But there's still a ton of niches, RJ, and that's what
Mm,
that's what I love about the business. It may not be sexy, but you can be really creative in this business, and you
mm,
can solve problems. Um, and There's just a wide range of places where you can sort of step in and make a name for yourself.
mm. Now, there's something to be said there, right? So you saw an opportunity in a kind of dispersed marketplace to come in, introduce some sophistication that the Mon Paws probably didn't have, and um, no doubt there might have been some M&A on your end in terms of acquiring, maybe building. I don't know, but I think that's interesting, and something that I talked to Darren Jacklin about a couple weeks ago. He said, approaching industries and getting into industries that are looked at as boring. He's in
Yeah.
accounting and kind of spyware, software, and these kind of services and products that may not be looked at all the time, but they're stable and they're always required. Something to be said there, right?
For sure. And you said it during COVID. I mean, you can have a lot of things shut down, but there's still,
Mm,
waste being produced. And in the U.S., when we shut down a lot of, a lot of retail and stuff was shut down, but all of the manufacturers were deemed essential, and so they kept, cranking out
mm,
product, and of course they were generating waste alongside of that. So it's always there. There's a
mm.
recurring revenue, and those are great businesses. Get a base and then build on the base.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a new lens to look at business opportunity through in terms of like pandemic. Like,
Right.
so like
It's
it probably wasn't something people looked at, in terms of that lens before, right? But
yeah.
you
I-
know,
It's funny. I have a page in my notebook that I started probably a couple months into COVID, and I started writing, COVID resistant businesses. And I just kind of writ because I thought to myself, maybe I need to, in addition to what I'm doing now, maybe there's an opportunity I should be looking at to um, either buy or start other what I would consider to be COVID or pandemic resistant businesses, because a lot of those I think are probably you're probably able to get get a presence in at a a price point that makes sense, and then just be ready for the next time. I definitely don't want to have my resources in anything that the government can shut down. um
mm,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, you can now leverage, and there's also the opportunity to that leverage the need to de-risk, right? So like
Yeah.
even if it's like if you have a business model or a product or service that provides the opportunity for the world to de-risk what COVID could bring, I think now it would be seen, people would pay for that, whereas before they may not, because
Good.
that kind of anticipation wasn't there. So let's move along into the business journey. So now you're in waste management. Now I think that's been a major part of your business journey. How has that whole process shaped your new work, like your new purpose? Like, why and how did you move from building a couple massive waste management firms, exiting, and now you're at where you're at in terms of trying to help other entrepreneurs do that? How did that whole process shape where you're at today, Mike?
Well, it actually started probably 10 years ago, and at the time, well, even more than 10 years ago, I was I started taking some of my discretionary income, and I was investing in stocks and that kind of thing, like most normal people do, RJ. And then um, at one point, I was watching it all the time, like CNBC here in the U.S. and you, like it was overtaking me, and I thought to myself, well, this is dumb because first of all, I can't do anything about any of these companies, right? And it occurred to me at that time that I had, while my entrepreneurial journey was certainly not smooth sailing all the time, it had been good to me, and people had helped me, and I thought to myself, uh, it's time to like return that favor, because I think I can be helpful to entrepreneurs, and I want to support them because I think they deserve it and they need it, and they can change the world. And so I started that a long time ago, sort of small, and then when I sold my first business, it gave me some more resources to put to work on that. And I started to really think about what I wanted to accomplish. And I'm still working through this, but right now my mission is to, help in some way, be helpful or be connected to 1,000 entrepreneurs who each build companies that are worth $20 million or more, and then encourage all of those entrepreneurs to pay that forward to 10 additional entrepreneurs. So at the end, you're creating, really, really, really massive value, and you're creating a lot of successful entrepreneurs and a lot of livelihoods for a lot of people and a lot of new capabilities in the world. And if I come anywhere close to, doing that, then I feel like I've done what I was put here to do.
What was the value what is the value that you see this ecosystem could create for these entrepreneurs that at the time when you were lost in the journey, or you were struggling, or you may not have been struggling because you had mentors, but what is that value that you're trying to produce and give to these entrepreneurs?
Well, I think money is definitely one, RJ. As you know, until fairly recently, it's become it could be very difficult to get money for a new idea. It could be difficult to get money to fuel growth. It could be very difficult to take a big order because you couldn't fund the gap between when you sent the product and had to pay for it and when you got paid. And now you're starting to see what I would call the democratization of resources, particularly money, being available to entrepreneurs through, things like Angel List and other types of syndicate type operations, where it's basically a crowdsourced funding of, people who have some means but may not be able to, fund the whole company like a venture capital firm or a private equity firm, but you're able to access a lot more money more easily. So that's one. And on the democratization end of it, the along with the money comes a lot of times free advice and experiences that were hard to come by. It was hard to get a mentor, a good mentor. Now you can get mentors much more easily. And access to experience, as I said, for free, instead of trying to figure out, well, who should I pay for, who's the right person to pay to get me where I want to be. And I'm not saying that it's still not a good idea to pay someone who can help you directly, but it sure is nice to have, a broad advisory board of sorts that's willing to contribute ideas to you for free. So that's kind of my two things that I think are different and important and helpful in being able to, scale entrepreneurism faster going forward than maybe it's been able to do in the past.
Mm-hmm. And that category of $20 million revenue turnover, what are the unique challenges? Because I have my view on that. I think it's an interesting category of size that you're focused on. And we're at Cora, which is my logistics business, we're about a $40 million company. So I understand the challenges within that category. Yeah. Why are you focused on that space particularly?
Well, I'm that number is value, not revenue turnover. So, and I picked it really arbitrarily because if you have a business valued at $20 million, to me, that's the place where you've demonstrated that your business is is worth something. It's not, it's not a solopreneur business that can't sell to anybody. And two, that's a meaningful number. That's a number that, a value number that you can live on, for example, or that you can have the resources to, carry on with, influencing 10 more people, which is what I want. I want to see happen. So it was an arbitrary number, but it was kind of come at from those two angles.
And so now you're talking about this entrepreneurial journey, and one of the taglines is it's about getting entrepreneurs unstuck.
Yes.
Now, what are the typical things that you see get entrepreneurs stuck?
Well, there's a ton of them. But I'd say the biggest one is just us as entrepreneurs. My own experience was that as my business was growing, we started from nothing. So everything was, a win. And I had a certain skill set that I used at the beginning that I thought was the right skill sets, and the right actions to be taking. But 10 years in or so, we were much bigger, and I was still treating the business like it was a startup, like it was an infant. And I had everything designed around the model that had been working for me. And I didn't realize it, of course. Felt very comfortable, but what it required of me was that, or I didn't feel comfortable. It felt normal. And what it required of me was to just approach everything was, I just have to work harder. I just have to do more. I just have to do this. I just
more
have to
energy.
do that. Yeah.
So it's not scalable. Yeah.
And not good energy, because the energy that I got from doing it that way at the beginning was like awesome, because when you get a win and you're like, this is phenomenal. But then after a while, the same things are happening and you're like, this sucks. Why do I have to deal with this? So I think a lot of us just do it to ourselves. I say that we design a system that's perfect. We perfectly design a system that puts us exactly where we are. Now you can deal with that, or you can't, or you can decide not to deal with it. But the good thing about dealing with that is, one, you're aware, and that's the first you're aware you're stuck, and then you're aware that you want to, get unstuck. And then there's this revelation, RJ, like, I think it's a revelation where if it's true that I designed a system perfectly to get me exactly where I am, then it should also be true that I can design another system to get me exactly where I want to go. So that's sort of the mindset around that I like to talk about, around how you get stuck in the first place, and then how you get unstuck and then break through. That's what I want people to do. Break through.
So what you're saying is the things that helped us arrive may not be the things that are going to help us to get there, but we have this confirmation bias that we think because we've done it to get there, it's got to be the way. And I agree with you. Like, how do we get out of our own way? Yes. I think leaders that can become more inclusive early in terms of getting the right talent, step aside from their own ego and their own frameworks. And I think that's a massive challenging piece. And yeah, I do agree with you that we typically have a way of seeing what got us to where we're at is being this confirmation that it's going to continue to help us propel in the right direction.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's really good. And I would throw maybe a tiny bit of hero complex on top of that, because you design a system where you're the hero, because everything comes to you and you can fix everything. So yeah, I like that a lot. The confirmation bias. You're right. We talk ourselves. We convince ourselves that yes, what got us here will get us there, and even though we don't like it, we just. So yeah, that's it.
With your own businesses, when you started to realize that you had this hero complex, how did you source trusted advisors within your business, and how did you get people on the journey for the long term? Like, did you do an equity play with people? Did you give people equity? Like, how did you get the right people around you to buy in and then stay on the bus for what is a difficult and long journey a lot of the times?
Well, I'd say that one thing that I didn't realize was that I already had people on the team who could do much more than I had asked them to do. And it's one of those things, right? If you, I heard a guy say this the other day, and I thought this was amazing. You can't have expectations without agreement. So I had these great people on my team. I had expectations for them in my mind, RJ, because I was getting frustrated, and I would think to myself, why aren't they just, jumping in here and doing it? But we never had an agreement about that. So they felt, I think, like the way that I was acting and the way that I had things set up was how I wanted it. So why would they come and suggest that you change it? So that was number one. And number two was, after my partner died in a fire at one of our plants about 10 years into the business, that's when I really got stuck. I call it, I feel like I was broken then. And I was in this place I've termed as the valley of uncertainty, where I'm wandering around, wondering what the hell just happened to me, and waiting for someone to come along and tell me what to do, or tell me it's not my fault, or tell me, how to get out of this. And I wandered around in there for a little while. And then another thing that occurred to me was, I designed this, like I said before, I designed this to be the way it is. So I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'd also really, really, and I think this was a really dumb move of mine, but I'm not the only one doing this. I was very, very, had a very, like a wall. I had sort of created a wall around my business and me, and I stayed inside that wall all the time because I thought that's where I needed to be. But to break through, I needed to get outside of that wall. And I was at a breakfast meeting, RJ, and the speaker was a guy who he owned a really nice restaurant in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, still does. And he was just talking about his experience, and he mentioned this coaching program that he had gotten into that had really changed how he thought about what he should be doing in the business, and what's the real role of the entrepreneur or the leader. And when your brain's open to something, your eyes and your ears are looking for it, and that happened to me that morning. And I joined that coaching program, which is called the Strategic Coach, and that was a really big step in helping me get my thinking clear and actually, develop a strategy, put tools together, and just create a future for myself that was different than what I had thought it was going to be. It was the future I wanted to own, not the future that I thought would just come along with, without me having any control over it.
How important, or in your view, like just looking at different businesses, your journey, other businesses' journeys that you may be involved in, the entrepreneur, the person that starts the firm, how do they know when to step away and let a external CEO come in and run the firm? Like, how do they know when it's good for them to play more of a founder piece versus actually running the business?
I would say that most of them don't. They don't know. They have to. So that shift has to usually comes from someone else. Now, there are some very enlightened founders who know from the very beginning that they are not designed to run this business. There are some of those. And I'm inspired by them, because it's not easy to start something and say, you know what, I'm probably not the person to take it to the next level. I think many more of them have that realization brought to them by some other force or some other person, whether it be, their equity partner. That happens a lot, right? They partner with you, and then they go, hey, you know what, we've been trying this for a while, and I don't think you're the right person to run it, which is tough. That's a tough pill to swallow, or it could be your bank or someone else who sees, but I think it's very rare for a founder to be able to take a business, through a life cycle, especially if the business grows a lot, because it often takes different skill set than what you have. So knowing what your skill set is going in, or knowing what your like in strategic coach, they call it unique ability. What your unique ability is very, very helpful, because once you know that, then you can start, to design the business so that you're only doing the things that, that you've got the skill set for. And it makes it easier then, once you get your head around that. I think it makes it easier for you to bring in, the management talent that you need, and not feel like that's a slight on you. That's like a perfectly designed system, right? So I'm only going to do these things because these things move the needle, and this is what I'm good at, and nobody else is as good as me. But the rest of it, there's plenty of people as good as me. So let me just give into that. And I think that's a great revelation to have. Some come to it easily, and some not so easily.
It's an interesting one. The firm that I worked in previously, as a senior kind of consultant, that firm has recently sold to the Singapore Post for almost $300 million. Right now, that firm was started by a 22-year-old, and he, by the time he was maybe 27, 28, had pulled out. And what he did was he brought in people that had the skills to run the firm. And just as a observer watching, because they're now a competitor of mine.
Okay.
I'm a partner in a firm, a much smaller firm that is a competitor of them. But just observing is from afar, what he did well was his ego was more tied to not the running of the firm, but watching it grow into a behemoth. He didn't have to be the driver of it, but he got his satisfaction from watching and being the orchestrator of it. So his talent was, he started it, but he was able to identify the right people at the right time, but he never let his foot off the pedal in terms of, he never fully gave control to the CEO. He was always looking for people at the right time of the business journey. And he's innately attuned to people and the strengths of individuals. So what he did was, he, for the next 12 years or 13 years, just kind of in the background orchestrated who was to be where at the right place at the right time. And it freed up his energy to also, and his time to go focus in diversification as well in terms of his interests. So just observing that journey as to what he did and why his firm, in terms of its nearest competitors, is 3 or 4 times the size of any firm that is in the vicinity. He did that because he identified early on that by stepping away, giving equity to the right people, bringing in the right people at the right time, and then managing that ecosystem of people, he could scale. Nice. And I think that's a very powerful example as to, he was connected to what his objectives were. And he realized that he didn't necessarily, and he probably wasn't the person best suited to drive that. And he identified that very early on in the piece. The firm that I'm in, similar piece. The founder, he tried to do it, and then he brought in people like myself, the CEO, and the management team on an equity piece. And we've done this before, right? And so he stays involved. He dabbles in certain functions, and it's interesting to watch him because part of him still wants to be involved in the day-to-day. By him doing that, it creates complexity too, because he kind of drops in and out where and how he feels, but he's slowly moving away, right? And so it's getting better though by him doing that.
Yeah, it's kind of because it's tough, right? Like the first person you mentioned, really smart, right? Now maybe he came to those realizations by himself. Maybe he had, advisors or something who helped him with that early. But but what you described is he's probably the 1%, that gets it and does that. Your current experience reminds me of uh, uh, still in the small percentage, but much, they're the ones that are really struggling with the change, right? Because um, they still feel like their judgment is really good judgment, right? They feel like their ideas are good ideas, and it's hard not to jump in and sort of leave a mess and then walk away and
The,
expect other
the,
people
the
to
thing,
kind of clean it up.
yeah, you're right. I mean, the thing about him is he's young-ish still. Like we're all, a pretty young team, and he's maybe
Hmm.
42, 43. He's got young kids at home. He likes to come into the office still. He gets involved with, I'm head of growth, so I do the fun stuff. And he
Okay.
gets involved with me. He still has unique relationships with our suppliers. He's kind of the fun guy. The staff love him. And so in Australia, we have a very different culture to the US in the sense that the staff take the piss out of the boss here, right? There's a very,
What does that mean?
what I mean is Australian culture is such where, and there's a downside to it, but there's an upside to it where there's no hierarchy when it comes to people making fun of you.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
And
Okay.
okay, like there's no, he'll come in, we'll bag him out like this. Like it's a fun culture. People like him. And so he has a lot of fun coming here. So there's still a lot of value. But what we're increasingly trying to do is put him in a place where he's just the founder and kind of this spiritual leader, and he can play that role. And so, but there's still some unique knowledge that we leverage from him that we haven't yet found a way to bring into the business within the people that are operating the business, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if
Yeah.
you're making fun of someone, that's a sign, that's you're showing respect by being able to
And
make fun of them. Is that
in Australia, it's funny like that. It's
okay?
if people what they call take the piss out of you, which is making fun, it means they really like you, right?
Ah, okay.
It's a culture here in Australia, and it's also what we believe is fueled what we call tall poppy in Australia, where people make fun of themselves a lot.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like if you're seen to take yourself too seriously, people are like, oh. So in some ways, it's a great culture in that sense where you've got everyone that kind of is happy to be happy-go-lucky, not take themselves too seriously. But at the same time, when you try to take yourself seriously, there's 1,000 people that are willing to bring you down too, because they're like, look at that guy, he's taking like. So it's a funny,
Okay.
unique
Yeah.
culture. And as an American coming here, we take ourselves very seriously in the U.S., right? So it took some time for me to adjust to, you stand up from a mountaintop here, you tell people you're going to rule the world. People are like, come on, you're a dickhead, get down, right? Like that's
Okay.
the culture
Yeah.
here, right? Like, do you know what I mean? We do it with our politicians, and in that sense, it's very different to the U.S. But yeah. So look, I sorry, I digress. I just we'll take it back to some of the concepts that that are in your book as well. Like, okay, so you talk about servant leadership, but you also talk about being selfish.
Yeah.
So how do we juxtapose those? Like, how do we play with those two ideas at the same time?
Sure. Well, the short answer for me is you need to be selfish first if you're ever going to be servant. And what I mean by that is, in my experience, I thought that being selfless, at least the way I described it, being servant meant that I put everybody else first. So I came last, everybody else came first, and that ended up getting me to a place that I didn't want to be, because, like I was talking about earlier, these perfectly designed systems. So maybe I didn't understand what selfless or servant meant, but the way I did understand it, it took all of the energy away from me. Now, was it Was it good for the business? I think it was for a little while, RJ. And then it became something that held the business back and frustrated me at the same time, which is not a good combination. So when I talk about being selfish, even though that's, the word is typically, sort of, it's got a lot of negative connotations about it. What I mean is, in order for me to be the best leader that I could be, I needed to know what I wanted my future to look like. And I needed to know that as specifically as I could possibly do it. So that took time, reflection, tools, coaching, all kinds of things. But once I was clear on that, then I knew a couple of things. One, obviously I knew where I wanted to be. Two, I could explain to other people on the team, hey, this is exactly where we're going. I don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but this is where we're going. And then that allowed me to, change the way I had been thinking about my team, because I had told you before, I had a lot of capability in my team that I wasn't asking them to bring. And so I asked them to bring it, and they did. And in addition to that, it made clear to me that where we were missing the right people that were needed in order for us to own this future that I had, that I had visualized and communicated. So ultimately, for me, getting selfish actually allowed me to be a better selfless servant leader, because I knew where I was going. I wasn't the person anymore that selfless meant I put everybody else first so that I could be last. It was, I put myself and the business first in order for me to really be as helpful as I could possibly be. So that's kind of how I think about the difference there.
Do you think that originally the way you defined being selfless serves you to an extent, right? So it probably kept you in this negative cycle of resentment and see the business needs me to do everything, rah, 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 rah.
Yes.
But it might have been a definition thing, right? In terms of how you define selfless initially.
Could very well have been. But I guess when I think about like servant or level 5 leaders, and when you talk about them in books and stuff, it's more, it almost appears as like they came out of nowhere and they were just able to, just kind of be in the background and help everybody, and boom, the company performed, amazingly well. And I just don't think that's what really happened. I think they got very clear, and I use the term selfish. You could use another word to describe it, first, because they wouldn't be able to achieve what they achieved if they hadn't done that.
Yeah. I think it's priorities, and I think there's a negative connotation with the word selfish. But I agree with what you're saying. I think people hear the word selfish, they automatically assume it's a bad thing. I think what you're saying as well is that by prioritizing the business first, it means that you as a leader can be more effective within that servant leadership space, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I use the word selfish because I think that's what it really is, but it's not like I was being outwardly, like I completely changed myself and was being outwardly what people would characterize as selfish. It was really an internal thing. Get selfish in order for me to get selfless.
What do you think the most important kind of habits? We're a habits orientated show, so I always ask my guests this, like, in terms of, we're talking about entrepreneurs, we're talking about business people that are in the middle of scaling their firms. They're all consumed, and they may be working towards exit, they may be not. But what do you think the most important habits are for the entrepreneur in terms of possibly their business habits or personal habits whilst they're locked in this journey and trajectory?
Well, I'd say that the number one habit for me is to know where I'm going. Where am I leading people? So constantly reminding myself and everyone else about where we're going. The communicating that Like I've heard people, you've heard people say people have to hear something so many times before they hear it for the first time. And I say, when you're tired of telling people what it is you've been telling them, they're just starting to hear you. So you can't, so as far as a habit goes, communicating on that is a necessary habit. But first of all, you have to know what it is and you have to be able to communicate it. And I'd say after that, it comes down to simple things, right? Like, habits like doing what you say you're going to do, finishing what you start, saying please and thank you to people, being like calm, no matter what the situation is, right? Because the last thing everybody needs is for you to be, blowing a gasket or something, because then they don't know what, they freak out. So that's another one. Being present. It's always been hard to be present, especially if you're, the leader, but it's actually not hard. It's very easy. You just make it hard because you sort of confuse all the things that you need to be with what you need to be doing right now at this particular moment, being present with someone. So those are some habit examples that I hope are what you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about, how could people that are on this journey, that one was brilliant, or like focusing on what you need to be doing versus the things that you think you need to be. That's huge.
Right.
Like playing the ball that's in front of us, right? And so many of us are lost in 50 million different things.
Right.
And we're not really giving what's in front of us the right attention. And particularly, I think when you're a leader, the staff can feel that.
Yeah. And it's something that you have to, a lot of times you have to have, someone has to point it out to you, because you've just convinced yourself that, the signs of being busy are the signs of who you are. That's how you're showing that you're valuable, right? And it's really not. Showing that you're in control and present is what really shows people that you know what you're doing and that they want to follow you.
Yeah, it's a big one for me, and my personal journey in business. I've always seen myself and effectively have been used as a kind of lone gunsman, right? Like I've always built on my own. I've always been highly autonomous and really have liked that for the last, 12 to 13 years, but I'm transitioning to a piece now where I'm going to have to become more interested in other people's success and, having time for other people versus, the whole piece of enjoying doing what I'm doing and then having a lot of time to myself, because now I'm developing others and how am I showing up for them? Before I didn't really care as much, right? Because it was all about a result for me. And I would utilize people within our firm to help me get those results. But now I'm going to have to be building this team around me, and I'm going to have to become very aware, not saying I shouldn't have been before, but especially now, of how I'm showing up for people, how I'm developing them, how I'm seen, my levels of patience, being calm. And so I take what you're saying is important.
Yeah. And it's hard too, because your motor runs faster than other people's motors. That's just kind of why you are where you are. So slowing your motor down to be present for someone doesn't feel natural, right? You feel like, well, why don't they speed their motor up, right? So that they're with me, but it's your job to speed their motor up. It's not going to happen just because you expect it to or you want it to, so part of being present is giving them the attention they need, but also, working on getting them where you want them to be as well. So it's not as frustrating, but it's hard.
No, yeah. It's a personal development journey, really, isn't it?
I think you're right. Yeah.
Well, look, Mike, we'll leave it there. I really, really want to appreciate you for coming on the show. I know you have a lot going on. Can you tell our audience where they can find your podcast, where they can find your book, and what they could expect in your podcast and book?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my podcast is called How Did Happen. You can find it on Apple or you can find it on any podcast platform. You can also find it on my website, which is Mike Malatesta, MALATESTA.com. And my podcast is very simple. I explore, I go deep with individuals who've had some success in their life, and I'm trying to dig out the clues about that success that my audience that will inspire and activate greatness in my audience. That's what I'm trying to do, inspire and activate greatness. And then my book is called Ownership: How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck. That's available on Amazon or wherever you get your books. You can get that on my website as well. And that book, and we've talked about some of that today, RJ, that book is about my belief that entrepreneurs have an obligation. They deserve to go big. And going big, it doesn't necessarily mean money or whatever. It means going as big as you can possibly go. And as we talked about, that may be an easy thing to say, but it's a much harder thing to do. And so the book takes you through some of my journey and some of my stories on, as I pursued that go big idea. And while my stories are different than yours, my goal is that they resonate with a story in your life. Like you can put yourself in, we can put ourselves into the same shoes. And ultimately, you can see that if you are stuck or you're feeling like, maybe you want to quit or you want to backtrack or you want to expire or whatever the right word is, that's not really your job. Your job is to keep going forward. And hopefully I show you some ways that have worked for me that I think could work for you as well.
Brilliant. Again, Mike, thank you for joining us here in the land down under. And
my pleasure.
We'll leave it there. Thank you.
So exciting. Thanks, RJ.